Leonardo DiCaprio.
Miss Anne Hathaway.
Meryl Streep, the Iron Lady.
Alan Arkin in Little Miss Sunshine.
Kevin Costner.
Yes.
The King's Speech.
Birdman.
I'm Connor Rold, and welcome back to another episode of Redoing the Oscars. And this week we're going to be looking at the 1997 Oscars, the Titanic year, and talking about the Best Supporting Actress category and why I think Julianne Moore should have won for Boogie Nights. But if you're new to the series, welcome. What I do every single week is pick a different major Oscar category and give an alternative nominated pick that I think should have won. At the beginning of the videos, we talk about some historical context, where we were during the year, what were the other kind of winners to understand, kind of set the table. Then I go with my non-winner, someone that was actually nominated at the time but didn't win. And then I also talk about a non-nominated pick as well, someone who wasn't even nominated that I think should have been at least nominated, and in some cases maybe even should have won, before ultimately trying to decide with that final question of, did the Academy make the right decision? We're redoing the Oscars. I always like to give my personal opinions, but sometimes it's helpful to understand from like a macro point of view, like, did the Academy get it wrong, or do I just have a different preference amongst the different categories? Usually, because we switch it up each and every single week, I usually try to pick a category in which I think the Academy did actually get it wrong from a historical legacy point of view, a popularity sense, that if they were to redo it, they probably would go with one performance over the other. But not always the case, so stick around for that. If you want to hear my thoughts on individual of those categories, feel free to use the timestamps in the description below. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Let me know if you have an alternative pick for 1997. Let me know if you have an alternative pick for maybe one of the other categories. Maybe you really dislike, Titanic, and you think Good Will Hunting should have won for Best Picture. Let me know all that stuff in the comments down below. I love hearing that, and I encourage you to continue to comment. We've had a lot of engagement over these past few weeks, and I've been having a great time reading all of your comments. But without further ado, let's jump into things, starting off with that context, the 1997 Oscars. This was the Titanic Oscars, and this is still to date, and probably will forever be, the most watched telecast in Oscars history. It has this very unique combination of being an incredibly popular movie, one of the most popular movies of all time in terms of box office, in terms of people going back constantly to the theater to watch it, that ends up winning Best Picture as well. A time in which the Academy and the regular general public were kind of aligned. And I think it's just so fascinating to see a movie like Avengers Endgame, which at one point was the highest grossing movie of all time, similar to Titanic, and wasn't even nominated for a single Oscar. I think maybe it got visual effects or maybe nothing at all, but it wasn't even in consideration for something like Best Picture. It just shows you, in the 20 years difference, I think the clearest example. In 97, the biggest movie of the year also won Best Picture. In 2019, the biggest movie of the year wasn't even in consideration for a nomination in an expanded lineup of 9 or 10 films. So that's the kind of differences where we were versus where we are. But going back to 1997, I think because everyone thinks, including myself, of this Oscars as the Titanic year, I think of the James Cameron speech. I think of Matt and Ben and their speech for Good Will Hunting, winning for Best Original Screenplay. But because Titanic is actually kind of like a Lord of the Rings-esque type of a winner, in that it won a bunch of technical awards, but didn't win any acting awards. So when I think about the award show, I don't think of, Leonardo DiCaprio or Kate Winslet winning and giving a big speech. I think about all the technical awards, I think of James Cameron's speech, and oftentimes I forget who won for the acting categories. And part of it has to do with As Good as It Gets, the James L. Brooks film, that won 2 acting prizes for Best Lead Actor and Best Lead Actress. that's a film that I don't think has totally stood the test of time. It's kind of got odd politics. It's not necessarily the best James L. Brooks movie, and its two leads aren't super mainstream movie stars today like they were back in the day. Jack Nicholson, of course, is a legend, but hasn't done films in 15 years, so he's fallen out, I think, particularly amongst younger film fans, and Helen Hunt it didn't kind of sustain that power that she once had in the kind of late 90s there. So it is kind of a set of odd winners in a movie that I think some people of a certain generation like, but I don't think will necessarily be fondly remembered 30 years from now. And then you have the Best Supporting Actor category, which went to Robin Williams, which now that he has passed, unfortunately, I look back on that win very fondly because I'm glad that he did get a win while he was still alive. And I also think that's one of his most iconic roles, showcases that he can do drama as well as comedy. And that's a movie that has stood the test of time and is very well regarded. And people 16, 15 still watch that movie today and really engage with it. So it's an easy recommend for a lot of people as well. If you haven't seen that film, he's excellent in it, and it's a modern day classic in my opinion. But then that leads us to Best Supporting Actress, which we'll be covering, in which Kim Basinger wins for LA Confidential. So we'll talk about whether or not that was the right decision later on. It is the category, though, that I decided to redo, and let's jump into things on that side of things. My alternative nominated pick that I think should have won the 1997 Best Supporting Actress prize is Julianne Moore in Boogie Nights. This is a movie I absolutely love, from Paul Thomas Anderson, 26-year-old Paul Thomas Anderson exploding onto the scene, his second film, in a really audacious, vibrant story about the porn industry in the 70s. And I think this is one of Julianne Moore's best performances, even though she has now kind of morphed into more of a leading lady. She works very well in the supporting role. And I think that's what I love most about this role in this character, is that she is a true supporting performance, and that she helps support the themes and the ideas of the movie and help communicate that to the audience. Sometimes, especially in the modern day Oscars, we talk about like a Kieran Culkin in A Real Pain winning for Best Supporting Actor, even though he is essentially the co-lead of the movie. There's a genuine, though, strength to actually being a supporting role and supporting the movie and understanding what your purpose is, and that you're not the lead, but that you can still be impactful and very impactful to the telling of the story and what it ultimately wants to achieve. And Julianne Moore's character, her kind of a job in the movie, I think, is to give us warmth, maternal vibes, and sweetness, so that in the second half of the movie, when the realities of the real world start to creep in, and we see the kind of alienation that the world has put upon the porn industry and the people that work within it, it becomes even more heartbreaking. And what I love about her is that she's able to kind of do both in creating a very complex character, a character who feels very maternal when we have Dirk Diggler coming onto the scene and learning everybody. He sees her definitely as a motherly figure, and Roller Girl, played by Heather Graham, definitely does. They have that kind of great scene on the bed, but she is that kind of a role, a little bit of an older in a young person's scene, and is gladly kind of taking on what I would describe as a sweetness, or another word you could describe it is a vulnerability. I think she connects with a lot of the performers because she seems very sincere. She doesn't speak too quietly. She's always looking directly at the actor's eyes. She doesn't look like she's doing something and bothered and can be on her own. She really does kind of lock in on each individual character. And in that first hour of the movie, I think she radiates a sense of sweetness, of warmth, which I think adds to her character of feeling like this is a family. And the sweetness and the warmth and the positive vibes of that first half, she's bringing a lot of that to it, that sense of connection and that sense of family. So that when we have the second half of the movie and the realities of the real world start to creep in, and we start to see her personal life of not being able to see her child, and the struggle she has with her divorce and her co-parent, the realities of kind of where she's kind of a mother figure in this world, you realize that she wants to be a mother figure in this porn industry, in part because she can't be a maternal figure with her own child. And there's a sense of heartbreak that comes to it. And I think the heartbreak hits really hard on an emotional level because she nails the sweetness and the earnestness, and you really feel for her as a character in that first half as someone who seems like a really good person, but then you also understand some of the mistakes she makes and addiction to drugs and things like that, and the characters that she hangs around would be perceived on an outside level as dangerous for trying to raise a child. So there is I think she functions well at just on an emotional level, feeling heartbreak towards this character in the second half of the movie, but then also from a thematic level. When you're trying to tell a story about the porn industry in the 70s and the second half, which is very much so about the consequences of the actions of the first half and the bad side of things, she represents that in the most kind of human and basic emotional level of a mother trying to reconnect with her child and can't because of some of the actions done in the first part of the movie. So on a very base emotional level, you feel bad for this character. But from a thematic level of trying to understand why this industry is so kind of secluded and the prejudices that occur within that industry and what Paul Thomas Anderson was saying about the kind of unjust factor of some of those biases that society has, is represented through her character in that sense. So you have the thematic, but you also have the emotional, and it hits as hard not necessarily because of how well written the script is, but because of the vulnerability, because of the sweetness that Julianne Moore is able to bring in that first half of the movie that makes her arc that much more tragic in the second half. So a very smart and calculated performance in her role within the film, I think truly supporting to its ideas, but also the emotional underpinning of why you connected these characters in the first place. Julianne Moore in Boogie Nights would have been my winner for 1997 supporting actress. But talking about another great performance, someone who wasn't nominated, that wasn't even in the conversation, my alternative non-nominated pick would be Natalie Richards in Irma Vep. And in preparation for this episode, I didn't have a clear pick of who I wanted to go with. I thought of Sigourney Weaver for The Ice Storm. I thought of Sarah Polley in The Sweet Hereafter. I love Parker Posey in Waiting for Guffman. But this was actually a first-time watch for me, and I was really enamored by Natalie Richards in Irma Vep in her decision to portray mostly nervousness through extroversion. I thought that was a really unique choice that I hadn't necessarily seen before and works very well for this character and who this person is. So if you don't know, the film is essentially about a Maggie Cheung type who's making a movie with a kind of down-on-his-luck French director, and we see the kind of process of getting her here and trying on outfits, and a relationship sort of blooms between the costume designer, played by Natalie Richards, and Maggie Cheung, who plays Maggie, the kind of lead of this film. And the kind of will they, won't they of it. Maggie Cheung herself is kind of also, trying to get into character in sorts, and actually starts to kind of commit crimes outside of the film, which her character would do. There is a kind of trippy, meta-layered narrative that's going on without the film, but what I connected most to was this kind of will they, won't they, almost romantic relationship between these two women. And I mentioned this idea of nervousness through extroversion. And what I mean by that is when people think of nervousness, I think how a lot of actors would play that would be by going internally, being quiet, soft, shy, kind of looking their eyes in different directions, not necessarily knowing what to say. But when you have this character that Natalie Richards plays, who is essentially a type B character, this kind of chaotic woman who doesn't have necessarily all of the things in her life all put together, but is kind of just going through and floating through the moment day by day. When you have a character like that, it wouldn't make sense for them to be, I think, shy and nervous. It would make sense for them to yap and to actually spill their guts and to actually over-talk. And that's what I thought is so interesting, is that you're doing, as an actor, everything different than what people traditionally read as nervous, and yet it's clear just how nervous she is. It's clear just how kind of worry that she is that this person will like her. Even though she's doing things like talking a mile a minute and dominating the conversation and sharing personal secrets and kind of taking this woman throughout the city and introducing her to friends and members of the crew and things like that. There's still, through her acting and through her actions, a sense of nervousness, a sense of unsureness that this person, I'm maybe developing feelings for her, but I'm not necessarily sure if she feels the same way. There is this kind of interesting romantic tension, even though the actions themselves aren't traditionally nervousness. And I thought that was just a really interesting, unique take on a character and an excellent performance, because at the end of the day, the script says to play nervous, and that was ultimately achieved, in my opinion. The question about what an acting choice is, though, is that what makes the most sense? Does it make most sense to convey that nervousness through shyness? Or, in this case, this kind of type B, chaotic person, actually their nervousness wouldn't be through shyness. It would be through kind of this over-explaining, this extroversion, this, talking and oversharing sense. That would be their kind of version of not knowing necessarily when to stop and when to be quiet and when to listen. They would just kind of dominate the conversations because they don't know what else to do. It's an interesting kind of psychological approach to a character, and Natalie Richards wasn't even really in consideration at all. If you see, awards and critics and things like that, she wasn't in consideration for this film. This wasn't an Oscars movie, but I think definitely should have. She's done a lot of great, work in the Haneke films and other, European cinema, really throughout the early 90s into the 2000s. So it would have been nice for her to maybe get some recognition here. That's why I'm going to give her ultimately that kind of non-nominated pick. And I was definitely impressed for a first-time watch. She was a real big standout for me. But then to end things off, did the Academy make the right decision? And I'm going to go with a soft no. I like LA Confidential. I think LA Confidential is a movie that has stood the test of time and will be well appreciated and thought highly upon. That being said, I don't necessarily think of the movie and I think of her. It is an odd situation that I wouldn't necessarily immediately think to give her the Oscar, that she's the standout performance. I was actually listening to The Rewatchables, which is a great podcast, and they were covering LA Confidential, and the producer, Craig, who's in his late 20s, early 30s, he said the same thing, where he saw Kim Basinger won an Oscar for this and then was excited to check out the movie, and then after having seen the movie, was kind of perplexed that she was the ultimate winner from the film. And while she's good in the movie, I don't think necessarily she has a lot to do. She only has a few scenes in which they're somewhat similar. I mean, she does the role of being the femme fatale very well, and she looks like Veronica Lake. So, she does her job within the movie. I don't dislike the performance. I like the performance. It's just kind of an odd one to be this was the best one of the year. Particularly when I think you have Boogie Nights, which I do think is a slightly better film, and Julianne Moore, who eventually does get her Oscar in 2014, but that was definitely a legacy award win, where it's I can't believe we hadn't given her something for Far From Heaven or Safe or Boogie Nights or the countless great performances that she did have in the 90s and early 2000s. Instead, they eventually give it to her for Still Alice, which is a great performance, but maybe not a movie that is totally well beloved. So I think ultimately, if we're looking at this objectively, Julianne Moore has a slightly more well-respected career than Kim Basinger, and Boogie Nights is a slightly maybe more well-liked movie than LA Confidential, maybe at least to me, so it could be up for debate. Let me know in the comments below if you really like the Kim Basinger performance or if you would prefer Julianne Moore. It's not a disaster of a performance or anything like that. Next week, I think, without teasing it too much, but I do think we're going to be talking about a disaster of a win, that someone that definitely should not have won for that performance, probably shouldn't have been in that category. But in this case, it's did the Academy make the right decision? It's a fine decision. I think, though, in hindsight, maybe you would have given it to Julianne Moore here and then given it to someone else, let's say, in that 2014 year. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on the supporting actress category for this year. And stay tuned to next week. We're covering the 1996 year. Mondays at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. You can always expect a video. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.